Beatles. Four lads from Liverpool that shook the world. But who was the naughtiest Beatle? Four lads from Liverpool who conquered the world. But did the Beatles commit any crimes? Oh yes, lots of them. Welcome to Criminal Records, and this week we're looking at the criminal convictions of the greatest band ever, the Beatles. Mop tops or mob yobs, you decide. John was the smart Beatle, Paul was the cute one, George was the quiet one, and Ringo was the funny Beatle. But who was the naughtiest Beatle? Coming up in this week's edition of Criminal Records, we have marijuana, arson, wife-beating, criminal damage, assault PC and assault. But it's mostly marijuana. In fact, it's nearly all marijuana.
Let it A, let it B, let it C, let it D, let it F, G, H, I, K, double wobble, wobble, U, G.
According to his school report in 1955 at Quarrybank High School, John Lennon had 29 detentions for crimes ranging from impertinence to not wearing a school cap, silly conduct, groaning, foolish remarks, being a nuisance, being late, being very late, shoving, fighting, sabotage and showing no interest whatsoever. Then, in 1968, he got into real trouble.
I now declare this bridge open.
It's the 18th of October 1968. John and his heavily pregnant wife Yoko Ono are at a flat owned by Ringo Starr. Number 34 Montague Square. Norman Pilcher arrested John Lennon and Yoko Ono right here. The Beatles have just finished recording the White Album. The last day of mixing on that seminal piece of vinyl will go ahead today without him. There's a knock at the door. The drug squad are demanding entry. It's not a surprise. 3 weeks earlier, Lennon had been tipped off that the police were coming to raid the flat. Lennon wasn't an idiot. He didn't bring any drugs to the flat. That flat had been home to Jimi Hendrix and Paul McCartney. Both are notorious potheads. So Lennon got Pete Shotton, the former washboard player in the Quarrymen, to search the flat top to bottom. Lennon was really impressed with the job he did. He thought Shotton had done a great job cleaning the flat. Shotton even took the vacuum cleaner bag away. Lennon was in the flat as he was at that time in the process of divorcing Cynthia, his first wife. Unfortunately for Lennon, his driver had brought some clothes and other stuff from his house to the flat, including a pair of binoculars. 8 police officers entered the flat at around 11:30 at night. 2 plainclothes detective sergeants, 2 detective constables, a policewoman, 2 sniffer dog handlers and 2 dogs, Yogi and Boo Boo.
Morning, Yogi. How you feeling?
Morning, Boo-Boo. Great, just great. Went to bed early, took a swim, climbed it.
The flat was surrounded. The police had turned up mob-handed. Officers at the front and at the back and even on the roof. The squad was led by notorious drug zealot, Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher. It's not the last time we're going to hear that name. He was the bent cop of rock who was not above planting drugs. But on this occasion, he didn't need to. Those sniffer dogs, Yogi and Boo Boo, took great interest in that pile of clothes brought over by the driver. The police found 191.8 grams of hash in a binocular case in the living room. And the press were there to photograph it all, tipped off, no doubt, by bent copper Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher. John and Yoko appeared at Marylebone Magistrates Court. Lennon pleaded guilty and, like a gentleman, took the fall. Yoko pleaded not guilty and all charges against her were dropped.
Give us a kiss.
John was defended by the Beatles' favourite solicitor, Mr. Martin Polden. He told the court he's an artist of note and integrity. He's brought pleasure to millions. He stood by his views. He's entitled to the compassion of the court. The magistrate decided to fine him as a man of considerable substance. Lennon was given a fine of £150 with 20 guineas costs. That's about £2.5 grand these days. It's still an offence today, but attitudes to drugs have changed, and frankly, I rarely see any convictions these days. That conviction, though, was going to cause trouble for Lennon for the rest of his life.
Are you listening to me, Lennon?
John, there's a rumour in the news of the Beatles paper that you might be leaving the group.
Rubbish.
The Beatles split up in 1970. John and Yoko moved to New York in August of 1971 and got to work, not only recording new music, but they embraced politics. Number 9. In December, they had a huge hit with Happy Christmas, War is Over. They rented billboard space in major cities around the world. The poster declared, War is over, if you want it. Happy Christmas, John and Yoko.
Happy Christmas, Julian.
The FBI and President Nixon were scared of John Lennon. For the 1972 election, the voting age was being brought down from 21 to 18. Nixon thought Lennon could influence the election and wanted to deport him. The FBI put John under surveillance. J. Edgar Hoover himself issued an order that Lennon be arrested for drugs possession at the earliest opportunity. There was even a wanted poster. Lennon really wanted to stay in the US. Yoko at that time was involved in a custody dispute with her first husband, so John played ball. Nixon won the 1972 election with an overwhelming landslide. Even so, on March the 23rd, 1973, Lennon was issued with an order to leave the country from the US immigration authorities. He was given 60 days to leave the country or else. The reason given was that marijuana conviction back in London. In 1975, Judge Kaufman refused to deport John Lennon, saying the courts will not condone selective deportation based upon secret political grounds. John Lennon's 4-year battle to remain in our country is testimony to his faith in this American dream. He was issued with a green card. In 1976, he died in New York, one of the very many victims of the Second Amendment.
This individual, Mr. Chapman, came up behind him and called to him, Mr. Lennon, as he arrived at that doorway. And then in a combat stance, he emptied the Charter Arms .38 caliber gun that he had with him and shot John Lennon.
Witnesses told police Lennon was shot near the door to his apartment building as he and Yoko Ono returned from a recording studio.
I saw John and Yoko get out of the limousine. They walked into the gate, and then I heard four or five shots. They were ear-shattering. I heard Yoko, and I heard a woman screaming. It was Yoko. She was screaming to help me.
This evening, John Lennon arrived at the emergency room at the Roosevelt Hospital. He was dead at the time of his arrival.
Lennon was shot and killed at about 11 o'clock last night outside his apartment building.
The man accused of shooting Lennon dropped his gun afterward and waited for police to arrive. A detective who questioned him at a nearby police station said he is Mark Chapman, a 25-year-old Hawaiian who has been in New York 1 week. At the hospital where Lennon was taken, young people prayed.
He's not dead. John Lennon can't be dead.
Mark Chapman, charged with the murder of John Lennon, will be arraigned later this morning.
After the break, Paul McCartney gets busted for arson and marijuana. Don't go flicking. Picture yourself on a boat on a river, tangerine dreams, marmalade skies. Nobody knows. The girl with kaleidoscope eyes. So incredibly high.
Goodbye and thank you.
I never have taken drugs. Are you going to?
No,
Never
again.
Were you worried about being sent to jail?
Yes, I know.
Then why did you do it?
Do you mean it this time?
Do you mean it this time?
Probably not.
Oh, no, 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 no. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Welcome back to part 2 of Criminal Records, the show that looks at the crimes and misdemeanors of the stars of rock and roll. In part 1, we saw John Lennon got 1 conviction. Can any of the other Beatles beat that record?
Listen, do you want to know a secret?
And you've always been known as a nice guy, but you've been in jail twice.
Twice? Yeah, that's right. You have to bring that up.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the most successful pop writer ever. 91 top 10 singles, 33 number 1s. I'm assuming you know who Paul McCartney is. And if you don't, really? But what about his criminal records? Again, he is a record breaker. Paul McCartney is a very naughty Beatle. He's been arrested 6 times. At the age of just 18, on the 9th of November 1960, Paul and original Beatles drummer Pete Best were arrested for arson. Yes, arson. The Beatles were in Hamburg, popping pills and playing all night. Their contract was terminated and they had to leave Germany. Pete Best and Paul were the last to leave. They'd been staying at the Bambi Kino Cinema. Paul and Pete went to get their things. It was dark and they were idiot teenagers. They pinned 4 condoms to the wall and set them on fire. Like you do. Already angered by the band violating their contract, Bruno Koschminder, owner of the Indra Club, reported Sir Paul McCartney and Mr. Pete Best to the police, saying they'd attempted to set fire to the whole place. There wasn't a lot of damage, but they were arrested and spent the night in jail. In the morning, they were deported. They were free as a bird.
Goedenavond allemaal en van harte welkom. De aankondiging is verder ongelooflijk.
On August the 10th, 1972, Wings were on a tour travelling on a double-decker bus. They were on stage playing in Gothenburg, Sweden. The concert was cut short. The police pulled the plug and the music stopped. A 30-year-old Paul, along with Linda and drummer Denny Sywell, were taken to the police station for questioning for 4 hours. Customs officers had found 5 ounces of hash in a parcel that was posted to Paul and Linda. Apparently, Wings got their pot by post.
Yellow Submarine, probably, just because I'm learning it on the guitar.
What's your name?
Lee.
Thank you very much, Lee. They paid fines of around £2,000 and then carried on with the tour. Only days later, in September 1972, a crime prevention officer visited Paul's Scottish farm, High Park Farm, near Mull of Kintyre, just to give him some advice. The eagle-eyed copper spotted 5 cannabis plants growing in the greenhouse. Paul was found not guilty for possession, but pleaded guilty to cultivation. He got a £100 fine, but was denied a US visa. McCartney told the court that he'd been given seeds by a fan and was unaware that they would come up illegal.
At the court, McCartney, who'd been given 2 weeks to pay the fine, said the judge is a great guy.
Yeah, well, we got a load of seeds, you know, kind of in the post, and we didn't know what they were, you know, we kind of planted them all, and 5 of them came up illegal.
prolific offender. Nothing's going to stop him smoking the wacky backy. 2 years later in 1975, and Paul and Linda are driving through Los Angeles. Paul ran a red light. A cop pulled over the Lincoln Continental and smelt, you guessed it, more marijuana. Linda was arrested. At court, the judge was satisfied that Linda had completed a 6-month drug diversion program and dismissed the charges. It wasn't to be the last time that Linda would take the fall. Back in 1966, the Beatles were on tour in Japan, and they sent bent copper Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher a postcard that read, "You can't catch us now." But that gag fell flat on January the 16th, 1980, when
McCartney, accompanied by his wife Linda and 4 children, got a superstar welcome at Tokyo's International Airport on his arrival for a concert tour.
I got arrested in Tokyo.
Customs officers at Tokyo Airport found, guess what?
Pot in their possession. At Narita Airport, customs officials showed the confiscated marijuana to newsmen.
Weed in Paul's luggage, and it wasn't a small amount.
And right on the top is this big bag of grass.
Half a pound, 7.7 ounces. He really was the fool on the hill. With eyes in his head, he watched the world spinning round and round and round. It beggars belief, it really does, that Paul could have been quite so daft. He had lobbied to get the visa to perform in Japan for ages. The Japanese were very reluctant to let him play there because of his drug use.
But the former Beatle has yet to give the public and his disappointed fans his own version of
That's what I always wanted to ask you. Why bring pot into Japan anyway?
Tell me about it. Listen,
I mean, you could score
do you think I ask myself that like every day now?
Well, you were taking marijuana into Japan.
And I didn't know I was.
The story people have put to me that I was framed.
They allege the singer admitted bringing pot into Japan, but only to smoke privately.
The reason I got put in there was my attitude was officially kind of too casual towards it.
Yeah. And in my suitcase, yes, there was some marijuana in the suitcase.
For some reason, and I still can't explain, I took some in, and rather a large amount. It was a mistake, really. You know, I was in America, and the attitude is very different there from how it is in Japan. I didn't realize it was so strict. We'd been told, whatever we did, don't take it into Japan.
I still am hazy as to how that happened, but it did.
I think I was just stupid. I don't think I was.
Honest, you're blood.
I'm not sure. You never know. I might get a new song out of it.
McCartney made no effort to conceal the large plastic bag of pot. Instead, he simply placed it in his suitcase along with his clothes. Paul was arrested and sent to Tokyo Narcotics Detention Center, where he was known as prisoner number 22.
Narcotics investigators say Paul McCartney has broken the Japanese law.
This time it was serious, very serious. Paul argued it was for personal use, but there was enough Mother Mary for him to be charged with smuggling.
Former Beatle Paul McCartney was jailed without bail in Tokyo today after being arrested on charges of marijuana possession and smuggling.
Japan was not a drug-tolerant nation.
It turned out the penalty was 7 years hard labour.
But being famous is always a defence.
And some couldn't keep back the tears. At one time, when riot police were called to control fans besieging the office where McCartney was being questioned, it was almost like Beatlemania.
The jail was surrounded by adoring fans, and the Japanese thought it best to simply kick him out of the country. McCartney spent 9 days inside, though, before being deported.
How did you get out? How did I get out? Walking, on foot.
Yeah, but what did the authorities do?
They dropped the charges.
Why?
Well, don't ask me, ask them.
Don't you know?
Yeah, it was because it was not considered, I don't know. They just told me today I could get out, you know. I got out because of my celebrity. Yeah. And I was told and I knew that there were guys who didn't get out.
But he didn't get away with it. Not really. This was an expensive drug bust.
McCartney and his rock group Wings were to have given 11 performances in Japan, but the tour now has been cancelled.
100,000 of them who bought tickets will get their money back. But that's scant consolation when you've waited so long.
Any idea of the consequences of the whole thing? How do you mean? Well, financially or... Yeah, you know, it's a bit of a drag.
Paul had to cancel 11 concerts and he had to shell out £1 million to the promoters.
And I paid the penalty. Hey, this is life, you know, this is an old sailor's life.
When he was asked about it in 2004, McCartney said, "This stuff was too good to flush down the toilet, so I thought I'd take it with me." No remorse. Paul is a stoner.
Oh, well, hello everybody in Japan. I'd like to say sorry about the mistake there and hope we can come back sometime and not disappoint you next time and have a good time.
Paul's final brush with the law was exactly 4 years later on the 16th of January 1984 when he was busted in Barbados for, well, you guessed it, marijuana possession. What a surprise.
The charge yesterday, I was just caught with a small quantity of cannabis, for which I was fined $200 Barbados dollars. I don't hold any grudges. It didn't really spoil my holiday. I don't believe it's a terribly harmful thing to do.
Again, it was daft. He was caught buying pot on the beach. He was fined £70. Fittingly, at the time, he was #1 with Pipes of Peace.
Oh, no, get out of here.
The millionaire singer told reporters he thought cannabis was less harmful than nicotine and alcohol.
I would like to see it decriminalised, but I don't think in the privacy of my own room I was doing anyone any harm whatsoever.
What did you think?
Linda McCartney was making light of matters when she arrived, but this was before customs searched her baggage.
Poor Linda wasn't so lucky.
Linda McCartney, the wife of pop singer Paul McCartney, was arrested at Heathrow Airport this afternoon and charged with possessing cannabis. She'll appear in court later this month.
By all accounts, Paul was not happy, as the police in Barbados had done a thorough search. They told him they searched for everything, but they missed a small amount in Linda's handbag. It was only 4.9 grams with a street value of about a £5. Uxbridge Magistrates Court fined her £75. And with a love like that, you know you should be glad. This is Wimpole Street. Used to be home to Paul McCartney.
Excuse me, my friend. You're harassing me? Okay. No, you're harassing me. And I would like... do you mind taking it and turning it off? I'd like you not to film me. And this is your second warning. You're harassing me, okay?
On the 11th of February 2008, a 65-year-old Paul yelled and then slapped photographer James Jenkins outside his home. At the time, Paul was going through a particularly acrimonious divorce from Heather Mills. No charges were ever brought. Maybe we should let that one slide.
Really, just always think of ourselves as just happy little songwriters, just little rockers, you know, just playing in a rock group. But it gets more important than that after you've been over to America and you've sort of got knighted.
If you ask me, then I'm going to say, yeah, I have, you know. And if you ask me about drugs, I'm going to say, yeah, I have, because I'm not going to tell you a lie. It doesn't do me any good, doesn't do you any good. I personally believe it won't really make people leap around taking drugs, because people are like you and they're like me. You know, if they want to try it, they'll try it. If they don't want to, they won't.
For good. If you've got power, you've got to use it for the good. Because like everyone else, we read the papers, we go through all the things that most people go through. So if everyone wants to say a thing at a certain time, it's handy being a songwriter. You know, you can put your finger on it, like a yellow submarine.
In part 3, we take a look at George Harrison. Was he really the spiritual and quiet one? No, he wasn't. He was actually quite aggressive, really. See you after the break. No flicking. I can't get up there.
Last question. Do you still like to smoke marijuana?
No, I quit. Because I never have taken drugs. Are you going to?
No.
Were you worried about being
Never
sent?
again.
Were you worried about being sent to jail?
Yes, I know.
Then why did you do it?
Do you mean it this time? Pardon?
Do you mean it this time?
Probably not.
Oh, no, 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 no.
I love you all dearly. Goodbye.
I give you the one and only fabulous Beatles!
The Beatles. It's Beatles, there's Beatles, Beatle. In the end, it's like, oh, sod off with the Beatles, you know.
Welcome back to Criminal Records, the show that looks at the dark underbelly of crime in rock and pop.
Well now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for, Mr. George Harrison.
Hello, my name is George Harrison, and it's nice to be here. Cue the clap now. I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you.
George is remembered as the shy, quiet and spiritual Beatle, but he was not a good boy. He could be a tough and pugnacious character. Back in 1960, he was deported from Hamburg in Germany back to England for breach of Germany's curfew laws. At only 17, he was way too young to be playing clubs in the red light district.
And as it happened, it looked good because Paul was like left-handed and I was right-handed, and still am.
The Beatles went to the United States for just 2 weeks in February 1964, and it kick-started
An epidemic called Beatlemania
George has got sexy eyelashes!
has seized the teenage population, especially female.
That one, he's got sexy eyelashes!
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Over the next 6 months, they had 17 top 40 singles and 6 number ones. The boys were working 8 days a week. On Tuesday, the 11th of August 1964, they started recording Beatles for Sale and released A Hard Day's Night. That Friday, 14th, it was finished. On Tuesday the 18th, they flew to the States to play 32 shows. That Sunday, August the 23rd, 1964, they played the Hollywood Bowl. After the show, they went to the Whiskey A Go-Go. They were mobbed. Harrison threw his drink at a photographer, Robert Flora of the United Press. He missed, and accidentally soaked the actress Mamie Van Doren. George had a bad relationship with the press from pretty much then on.
The Beatles, you know, are going to go on till they die, you know. I mean, we can't get away from being the Beatles.
A few days before the Beatles were due to start the Get Back sessions on January the 21st, 1969, Harrison was in Nice, in France. Celebrity photographer Charles Beber took pictures of Harrison and Ringo and their wives leaving a club early one morning. George tripped him up. He fell and needed stitches in his leg. George even talks about it in the Peter Jackson documentary, Get Back. In the film, George looks the picture of innocence.
Beatle George Harrison above is due in court here today to answer assault charges. If he does not appear, he will be given an immediate jail sentence. Harrison is accused of assaulting a photographer last May as he and Beatle Ringo Starr left a nightclub. Hey!
But he was guilty, and the courts fined him 1,000 francs, about £5. On the 12th of March 1969, George Harrison and Pattie Boyd were getting ready to go to Paul and Linda's wedding. The Get Back sessions were done. The album Let It Be was about to be released in just a few days.
Do you want to hear a song I wrote last night? Okay. It's just a very short one. It's called I Me Mine.
Well, I'll get on the barrel organ.
I don't care if you don't want it. I don't give a fuck. It's going to be musical.
Detective Sergeant Norma Pilcher, yes, him again, was on a crusade to arrest another Beatle. 8 officers turned up at Harrison's Esher mansion, and once again, they were with a sniffer dog called Yogi.
I wanna cross you off my list. when you come knocking on my door.
And they found cannabis. Of course it was cannabis. They found lots. 120 cannabis joints were found. But dirty copper detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher claimed he'd found a large lump of hashish in a shoe. George said, "I'm a tidy man. I keep my socks in the sock drawer and my stash in the stash box. It's not mine." Me, mine. Not me, mine. Not I, me, mine. Harrison and Patty Boyd were both arrested, and again the press were there, but George was having none of it. So he ran after the photographer, grabbed him, he dropped his camera to the ground, and George stomped on it, smashing it. No charges were ever brought for escaping lawful custody or criminal damage. At Esher and Walton Magistrates Court, they were represented again by solicitor Martin Polden. They each got fines of £250 and 10 guineas costs. Once again, it caused problems for George when he wanted to visit the US. Despite all that peace and love, George was repeatedly involved in pretty aggressive incidents. It's September the 3rd, 1970, and George is moving house. My Sweet Lord is just about to be released and will go to #1 in Britain and America. George was driving past Selfridges, turning from Orchard Street onto Wigmore Street. He stopped in the yellow box and caused a traffic jam. So this is the corner of Wigmore Street and Orchard Street. Constable Stephen Gardner was directing traffic. The officer tried to get George's attention. George ignored him. The officer banged on the roof of his car. Still nothing. The officer walked down the side of the car. He banged on the window. He told George to pull over. Still nothing. The car moved forward. The officer stood in front of the car and said, "Stop." Harrison drove at the officer, bumping him on the knee. For George, all things must pass. 3 times he signalled him to stop, and 3 times he got bumped. George wouldn't let it be. The officer wasn't hurt, not at all, but he was shaken. He called for backup. More officers arrived at the scene, and it took them a full 15 minutes to get Harrison to open the door of his car and give his name and address. At court, Harrison pleaded guilty to driving without reasonable consideration. Once again, Beatles solicitor Martin Polden was there. He told Wells Street Magistrates Court that Harrison didn't mean to hurt PC Gardner and that he was a very mild-mannered man. Martin Polden must have been quite a solicitor. He explained to the court that George's car radio was on. He couldn't hear the officer screaming or shouting or banging on the roof. He said it was a miscalculation that developed into a misunderstanding and then stood before the court as a misdemeanour. He'd made a mistake which he wouldn't repeat. George was banned from driving for a month and fined £35 and 15 quid costs for a driving offence. That wouldn't happen to you today. It would be a lot steeper.
Thank you all for coming. Now fuck off.
All those nasty things which you sort of laughed at before Lennon's death suddenly must have become rather more serious.
He was dead at the moment that the first shots hit his body.
All things must pass, but when it's taken in a violent way like that by somebody else, it makes it very strange.
For a while afterwards, George was extremely concerned about his own safety. Because, I mean, there are plenty of cranks.
Everybody likes to say, okay, one of your best friends got assassinated, so surely you must be nervous about being assassinated too. You know, I like to take care, but I don't walk around fearing for my life, and I don't think, you know, anybody could be bothered killing me. You know, what's the point of killing me?
But then he is always still a Beatle, and a Beatle has to live a different life.
This part of the story is truly horrific. George's aggressive nature almost certainly saved his life. In 1999, George was asleep in his home on Friar Park Estate near Henley-on-Thames in Oxfordshire. It's around 3:30 in the morning. A madman has scaled the estate's walls. He's evaded the security. He's broken a window and he's now in the house. He's armed with a knife. George got up out of bed and found a man in his house. George ran at him head on, but the man stabbed him over and over again, puncturing his lung. Harrison's wife, Olivia, hit 30-year-old Michael Abram with a poker. Blood is spreading down Abram's blonde hair, but he grabs Olivia by the neck. George was a tough cookie. Despite his injury, he got up onto his feet, ran at Abram again. He freed Olivia by jumping onto his back. What happened next can only really be described in one way. George and Olivia beat the holy crap out of Abram. Now look, in English law, there is of course the defence of self-defence, but it has to be reasonable and proportionate. When the police looked at the injuries caused to Abraham, they investigated George. George absolutely could have been charged with assault. It looked like a burglary that had gone wrong. When George asked him why he was doing this, Abraham said, "You know why." When the police asked George what happened, he said it was not a burglary, and he certainly wasn't auditioning for the Travelling Wilburys. Despite his injuries and pain, he still found time to make a joke. Abram was certainly trying to kill George. Michael Abram believed that the Beatles were witches who flew around on broomsticks. Abram said to the police that he'd been sent on a mission by God to kill George. He thought George was a sorcerer and the devil. He believed he was the fifth Beatle, and he was convinced that Harrison was the Phantom Menace, a figure from the writings of Nostradamus. George had already been diagnosed with lung cancer, and the incident surely hastened his death. George was 56 at the time. Danny, his son, said he was like a yogi. He moved on from it physically and mentally and never let it affect him or his outlook on the world.
I mean, we're all going to die one day, but I'm not going to die for you quite yet.
Abram was found not guilty by way of insanity and committed to a psychiatric hospital. It was the cancer that killed George Harrison. He died in 2001. Abram was released in 2002. He's fully recovered. He's perfectly sane. He does charity work these days. And you know what? I think George would be pleased that Abraham has found some peace and is helping other people. All things must pass.
All things must pass, sure. But George is going to live forever. Thank you very much.
A lovely guy who's full of humour, as I say, even when I saw him last time, and he was obviously very unwell. He was still cracking jokes like he always was. And he'd be sorely missed. He's a beautiful man, and the world will miss him.
I mean, we grew up with the Beatles. You know, their music and the band, the personalities of the band were the background to our lives. And I think he will be very sad at his death.
After the break, we'll be concluding our look at the Beatles' criminal records. See you after the break.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. It was a little short this time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Good night.
It's alright.
And that's it, really. End of story.
Peace and love. Peace and love, everybody. Peace and love.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Peace and love.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Peace and love. Peace and love.
Welcome to the final part of Criminal Records. Can Ringo Starr beat Paul McCartney to be the naughtiest Beatle? No he can't. Ringo is the shortest and the poorest Beatle, but he's also the goodest. He's never been arrested.
And just, I mean, honestly, if you're a drummer and you can do this, and have people dancing, you're a fucking badass.
He wasn't a saint. He certainly used drugs and had a real booze problem. Like Lennon, he possibly did use his fists on his wives.
I used to be cruel to my woman, I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved.
But he admitted it, regretted it, booked into rehab and reformed.
Man, I was mean, but I'm changing my scene, and I'm doing the best that I can.
Ringo was never arrested. That's great for Ringo, but it's a bit of a problem, let's face it, for a show in 4 parts about the Beatles' criminal records.
There's only me on it, folks. It's the full Ringo.
Well, except Ringo. This is the last part, and Ringo never committed any offences, which has completely bloody ruined the entire idea of doing this.
Anyway, I'm having fun, and I hope you are.
Although, we could talk about his grandchildren. Ringo has 8 of them. In February 2022...
Date is that?
February 2022, Tatia Starkey, the 36-year-old daughter of Ringo's son Zach, broke COVID regulations when she practiced with her indie band Bella Kiss during lockdown. She was given a £400 fine, £85 prosecution costs and a £40 victim surcharge. Tatia cheekily asked the court if her fine would be overturned if the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson got away with doing similar things.
Let me say immediately that I've paid the fine.
He didn't. She paid the fine. This is Abbey Road Studios, probably the most famous recording studios in the world. And this is probably the most famous pedestrian crossing in the world.
I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my
Sonny Starkey is another of Ringo's 8 grandchildren. Turns out he's mates with Oasis star Liam Gallagher and former All Saints singer Nicole Appleton's son, Gene. On the 17th of May 2019, 18-year-old Sonny and Gene were arrested at Tesco Express in Hampstead when their mate, 19-year-old model Noah Ponte, was racially abusive to a shopkeeper who refused to serve him a can of gin and tonic out of hours. It was only worth £1.70. Starkey and Gallagher threw kicks and punches at an employee who got Sonny Starkey in a headlock. Gallagher and Sonny Starkey were charged with a fray and assault, but the case collapsed. The shop CCTV clearly showed they were acting in self-defence. But Judge Greenberg at Westminster Magistrates Court was not impressed with the children of rock. She said Gallagher and Starkey were completely out of order, entitled young men misbehaving. She bound them over to keep the peace for 12 months.
Ringo has his own rules. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, is said to tire of those who ask about the Beatles, hasn't signed autographs in years, and doesn't shake hands, bumps elbows instead.
Hey, well done, Peter. Nice to meet you.
I guess Ringo could have been arrested when the Beatles performed their last concert on the roof of the Apple building on Savile Row. It was the police who stopped it by threatening to arrest all of them for disturbing the peace. This is number 3 Savile Row. The Beatles performed their last concert up there on the roof. Our police have a long history of being killjoys on the wrong side of history.
He has the magic touch. I mean, it's a fucking Ringo.
So what happened to Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher? He was the crooked cop who arrested half the Beatles along with Dusty Springfield, Mick Jagger, Eric Clapton and many, many more. Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher was eventually convicted of perjury and planting drugs. He went to prison in 1972 for 4 years. He will be forever remembered as a very sorry excuse for a police officer. Far from being a respected lawman, he is the butt of many old jokes. Lennon called him Semolina Pilchard, climbing up the Eiffel Tower in I Am the Walrus. Monty Python called him Spiny Norman in the Piranha Brothers sketch. Eric Idle called him Brian Plant in the Ruttles. In the 1960s, the Met Police were horribly corrupt. It took years to root out that corruption from the Met. Much like today, the police wouldn't or couldn't do it themselves. And remember, it was judges, lawyers, journalists and public opinion that reformed the police with the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984. The Beatles weren't that bad, really. They liked smoking pot. It's not the worst crime in their world. Like their music, they were ahead of their time. Cannabis is legal now just about everywhere, and the music of the Beatles is just as loved today as it ever was. The most shocking thing they did really was grow their hair long. Norman Nobby Pilcher is the villain of this story, not John, Paul, George and Ringo. But let's not end this on a bent copper. Let's end it on an uplifting legal note instead. The solicitor who represented John and Yoko and George and Pattie Boyd was Martin Polden, and he was by all accounts a thoroughly decent chap and an eminent and respected solicitor. All that peace and love certainly rubbed off on him as well. He set up a charity called the Environmental Law Foundation. He brought together lawyers and experts to help communities faced with environmental problems, and they did the work for free.
Define the best drummer in the world.
4 drums. That's all Ringo Starr needed.
Ringo was the king of feel.
He's a song drummer.
He actually used his kit in a very different way, a very creative way.
Really cool, very innovative.
All you need is love, but all I need is for you to subscribe. Thanks for watching. Peace and love, peace and love, peace and love. Bye-bye, till next time. Oh, this is a long and winding road. I'm the walrus. Cuckoo-cuckoo.
Favourite Beatle track? It's got to be, I do like, is it Hello?
Yeah.
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 I'm
Hello,
a big
goodbye.
fan of, yeah.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Goodbye.
And goodbye. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good day.
The F sharp minor sounded out of tune.
Come on now. It's time you little toddlers were in bed. I'm having no more messing. You've been out to the park all day, you've had a lovely time. Now it's time for bed. Are we ready? Daddy'll sing a song. Now it's time.
Sorry.
It was
If
me.
you do that again, are we ready? We'll sing the song.
Peace and love.
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 Peace and love. Peace and love.
Peace and love. Peace and love.
Ringo was the coolest one.